And we are live. Tonight we are chatting with the one and only Christiana Ellis. How are you doing tonight, Christiana?
I'm doing great. It's a hot weather sort of week here in Massachusetts. So staying inside is my new favorite thing. Not that I ever didn't like it, but
Yeah, definitely having red hair must not have made the sun your favorite friend.
it's true in the sense that I really can't tan. I burn and freckle. And so, but I have recently taken to wearing a hat when I go out in the sun, which is a new thing for me. I've never really tried it before, but I'm liking it.
Okay. So, since we are pulling you away from your lovely puppy and No Man's Sky, um, how are things going for you?
Pretty good. I am just I'm a month into starting a new day job uh, project as a consultant, so I've been getting used to that and doing public transportation for my commute for the first time over the last month, which has been an interesting transition. There's both positive and negative things about it, naturally, but I've been enjoying that, so that's kind of going well. Luna's doing great. Just took her for a walk outside earlier, and um, just trying to, I have lots of sort of things orbiting, and so like I've been writing Phyllis Esposito Interdimensional Private Eye, and that's been an interesting experiment, just sort of writing this serialized every single day, and the story is getting close to wrapping up. So I have kind of in the back of my head also thoughts about, well, okay, what's the next thing? What other formats might I want to put that story in? And also just you mentioned No Man's Sky. Got to take those video game breaks every so often.
Right. So, for people who haven't been following your daily blogging trees, what is Esposito about?
So Phyllis Esposito, Interdimensional Private Eyes, the name. That this was kind of just an experiment that I decided to start back in January, where I'd been a little bit frustrated with my ability to stick to a writing schedule and write every day. And because I had been having good luck with my 5 More Minutes videos, which is just a short little morning video that I do every day, I was thinking, well, I've had good luck with routines that I build in where I do something every single day because even on days that I don't feel like it, just the additional drive of, well, do I want today to be the day that I break the chain, so to speak? That extra motivation often helps me get into it. And so I decided, well, what sort of project could I do where I have something that forces me to do it every day? And so I've always been interested in serialized storytelling, and I just decided, well, let's just pick a premise that could go anywhere, that would give me just lots of things to play with, so to speak, in the toy box. And then I'll just write a little piece of it every single day. And so I decided, well, I'm going to pick starting structure of the classic noir private eye type of detective story, but then place it in a universe where there's millions of parallel dimensions and people can jump back and forth between them, and just use that to add sorts of different science fictional elements in it, and then just see what happens. And then sure enough, every day since the first of the year, I've written a new segment that's at least 500 words long, continuing the story. And it's gone all sorts of places with nanobots and aliens and moose unicorns and sorceresses and secret government task forces.
Okay. So, where did the idea of a moose unicorn come from?
It was just kind of a throwaway line at first. One of the secondary characters in the story is this guy, Detective Pensky. He's a homicide detective that Phyllis runs into over the course of her investigation, and he's kind of he's a little bit of the stereotype sort of tough guy, hard drinking, but wants to get the job done right, sort of police detective guy. And he ends up stranded along with Phyllis and a couple of other characters in a fantasy universe, with a place where there's going to be elves and dragons and wizards and stuff like that. And he is not happy about being there. This is not what he's used to. He's a city guy. He doesn't like wandering through the forest. He doesn't like having to deal with animals or magic or any of that, and he's unhappy. And so at one point he just is ranting about that and just talks about how it's going to get eaten by some freaking moose unicorn or something. And that's really where that came from. Just at first was him just kind of stream of consciousness ranting. But then what was fun is that I knew I had this incredibly powerful sorceress who was watching them and would be the kind of person who would think this was funny to basically create an actual moose unicorn in response to what he said to attack them with.
Okay. So, out of curiosity, with the fantasy land that they are in, any chance they are going to meet any dragons that might be friends with a certain horde leader?
It's funny because the nature of the universe that I created absolutely allows, or could allow for crossovers with other stories. So it could cross over with Nina, or just as easily it could cross over with Space Casey or any other a number of different stories. So while that's there's room for that, I kind of the nature of the way I've been writing this, where the rules I sort of set for myself is I'm trying not to write ahead, trying to let each individual days, I'll have some vague plans about what might happen, where I'm kind of trying to go, but I've been trying not to do too much steering in any one direction. And I guess even though the whole thing started as kind of a silly exercise, I think I ended up so invested in the story that it would feel a little bit like a crossover is too, it would break the immersion, so to speak. Which is not to say that I couldn't eventually write a crossover of some kind and that it wouldn't be fun. But I think this story, I'm probably not going to do that within the context of this particular story I'm telling.
Yeah. Well, of course, you could just have a dragon being chased by Nina and have them speaking a language that no one in your group can understand.
Have a little in-jokes or something.
Yeah. So, for people who have been following you for a while, is there another Space Casey or another Nina in the works? Or I know for a while you were working on another space story.
Well, so there was a while there where I had gotten ahead of myself with putting stuff out via podcast and feeling like I'd run out of stuff that I had written, and therefore had a gap in production because I needed to write new stuff. And so I this was a few years back, sort of started shifting my internal focus to trying to do more writing. But what that's also kind of resulted in is that I've got more stuff written and built up that I haven't actually put out. So what I've got in addition to, so once I finish the Phyllis story, I'm going to do some editing on that and then probably do an audio version and an ebook version of that. But what I also have is a sci-fi novel that's kind of turned into 5 novellas that I might do something with. And I also have a 90% complete rough draft of another story that's a little bit steampunky. And then I have a couple of other things that are, bits and pieces of storytelling that could grow into something else. And then I have ideas of what a Nina 2 or a Space Casey 3 might be. But the point is that I've kind of got a lot of stuff to polish and get ready is probably my next steps. And they're new things that people haven't seen before.
Okay. So at this point, do you have a timeline as to when things might happen in the future?
No, not in any specific sense. I think in terms of what I'm focusing on, Phyllis has probably got another couple of weeks, probably at the most, before I think of this story as being finished. And from there, I'll want to do a little bit of editing to polish it up. But that would probably be the next thing to start coming out is doing an audio version of that. Because it's been very exciting writing it as this daily serial. But I also think that it's probably true that that's not the most optimally convenient way for people to read it. I've got some people who've been reading it every day very loyally, and that's exciting. But it's also true that I've heard a lot from a lot of people that, I started reading it, but then I kind of lost my place and I couldn't remember where I was, and then I stopped. And so having something in a more consumable format, I think, is the next target for that story.
Well, yeah, that certainly makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
If you did do this as audio, do you see doing it as just a straight read, or would you be doing it as like Space Casey? Or
I think that it would be it would be a little bit like my first production of Nina, I think, which is that it is only me, but that I am going to be kind of doing voices for the characters as opposed to just reading it all in the same basic narrator voice. And then there would be minor incidental music and occasional effects, but not full like audio drama style. And part of that's just because as much as I love the audio drama format and I really enjoy the process of doing it, like with Space Casey, the truth is it's also way more work. And so at some point when I'm talking about doing something all by myself while I work full time, there becomes a balance of looking for the ideal end product while also still having an attainable schedule.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, also, T. Morris had a bit role in the first Nina, didn't he?
Yeah, I had one particular character that I thought he would be fun for, and so I did have a guest voice for one episode in that. So, and I wouldn't necessarily rule that out either as a possibility, but I think at least Plan A is it's easier for me to just do it myself.
Okay. So, as far as Nina is concerned, has rights reverted back to you, or?
I'm actually, I haven't looked into that in a while. Maybe I should just check to see what's going on. I mean, right now it's still available for sale through Dragon Moon Press. And so that I've kind of just had it rolling there. But I haven't really looked into any potential changes in that situation recently. As far as you asked about a possible sequel, and I did a few years back write a couple of chapters of what would be the sequel, and I kind of feel like I know what the story would be, but it's also not necessarily been the story that I'm feeling most drawn to write right now.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. Of course, my problem is I get started on a story and I'm all really into it, and then my brain is, what about that idea?
Yeah. Well, that's absolutely a real concern, and that was kind of part of my issue for a while, is that I wouldn't finish anything because as soon as any story gets to the point where it's work to try to push it through, you start getting all of these great ideas for something else that you could work on, but then you end up with a whole bunch of not even half finished stuff, and then nothing that ever gets finished. And yet there's also the flip side of that, which is that if you force yourself to say, well, I'm not going to work on anything else until X is finished, but you're having such a hard time working on that you end up not doing anything at all.
Yeah.
And so that was actually part of the idea behind this, Phyllis, which was just say, I need a project where I'm going to have some additional motivating factor to just keep me going. And it also, it really defines it into bite-sized chunks, so to speak, which is to say, when you're writing a whole novel, or, even when you're thinking of a chapter or a scene, it can start feeling like, well, that's so big. I don't feel like I have the energy to tackle that chapter right now. But with Phyllis, it's like, well, I have to write at least 500 words, and I can write 500 words, and it stops seeming like such a hurdle. So I just and it kind of proves it to myself that I can do it that way if I'm thinking of it in the right context.
Okay. So I would think if you're just doing it directly to a blog, the biggest issue would be when it's ready to do something else with it, like put it into an ebook, having to cut and paste it into another format would be kind of difficult.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I don't have to. So I'm not typing it directly into the blog software. I'm writing it in a Word document and then copying to the blog post. And so what that does mean is that, moving it into ebook format won't be a trivial exercise, but I do have a master Word document to start from. I don't have to try to export it from the blog itself or anything.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
So are you going to Balticon this year?
Balticon, yes. I always try to go to.
Sorry, Dragon Con I meant.
Yeah, I thought maybe you meant that just because it was coming up sooner, but no, I'm not. I think last year I was kind of in a situation where I just really literally couldn't afford it, couldn't make it happen at all. And so this year I'm a little bit more got my feet under me in that sense, but trying to just save money. And I didn't feel like I necessarily had I wasn't feeling 100% like driven, like, oh, I have to go to Dragon Con. It was more like, well, maybe I need to save my money a little bit more and try to, get settled back in to, and, I was just changing job project. Short version, no, I'm not going to Dragon Con. I do miss it because there's people that I only see at Dragon Con, and so I miss seeing them. But I've had a couple of other trips this year so far that kind of, ate up some of my normal travel budget. Right.
Yeah, and of course your brother would probably never forgive you if you missed that trip.
Yeah, so I did. It's actually funny you mentioned my brother did get married earlier this year, and that his wedding day was the one day that I didn't write a full episode of Phyllis. So since January 1st, only the day that I spent all day helping at my brother's wedding was enough of a threshold for me to not write a full episode.
Yeah. Well, I did really enjoy the one time I've been to Dragon Con.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when I met you in person.
Mm-hmm.
And met a few other people in person, I did decide it's way too big.
Yeah, it's definitely very different than like most cons that I go to are smaller than that by a wide margin, and that's one where it's the crowds are just really intense, and that's not always fun for everybody to deal with. There's a spectacle to it, which is great, but it can be overwhelming for sure.
Yeah. Well, like even at smaller cons, you have to decide, oh, do I want to visit that panel or do I want to visit this panel? Mm-hmm. But at Dragon Con, it's like, okay, here's 4 panels I want to visit, and they're all on at the same time.
Yeah.
that makes it really difficult.
Yeah, and then also just the idea of like, oh, I want to get to this panel, but it's at all the way at that other hotel, so you have to walk half mile over there through these just intense, packed with people crowds and
Yeah. Well, at least they
that.
were nice.
Hmm?
At least they were nice enough to make it so you don't have to deal with traffic. Also.
Yeah. Yeah. So I love Dragon Con, and it's definitely not. It's not anything against Dragon Con in this case. It's more just a matter that I felt like I wanted to stay a little closer to home this year.
Okay. So, with which would you say was more different, the um, first year of Dragon Con or the first year of Balticon without PG?
Hmm. Well, it's interesting because the first year back to Balticon after losing PG wasn't it wasn't hard in the sense that like I was going to have to deal with that because it was almost more a reassuring thing because it was going back to the a place that I know he loved and being around all of these other people that also loved him. So that was like really a positive thing. Not, it's not like I was happy to be there without him, but you know what I mean is that it wasn't more difficult to go. It was a comfort. But yeah, I guess what was the question though? What was more different?
Yeah, because I remember hearing that Balticon had a special dance in his honor.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so yeah, we kind of both things. That just, gosh, some of these cons are blurring in my head now. In terms of, they do blur together sometimes after a while. Okay. Yeah, I remember. So, I did go to the Dragon Con that was sort of immediately, it was, the same year that he died. And so that was what I was remembering in the sense of having sort of a function to sort of honor him. And it's true that in Balticon, just we had kind of more, we took the whole new media party, which is something that happens every year, but we kind of made that kind of in his honor sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, but certainly he had friends at both cons for sure.
Yeah. It was too bad that at Dragon Con, I suppose he never did get to meet the comic book guy who was right across the hall, did he?
Stan Lee? Oh, that's a funny story. Just in the sense that he and I were roommates at that particular con, and so we encountered Stan Lee a couple of times actually, but just then only discovered that he was literally in the room right across the hall from us, which just seemed kind of incredible and inexplicable to us. Like shouldn't he sort of like be in a more important place somehow? I don't know where that would have been, but it was kind of funny to realize that. And we put I wrote about this story in the Tales of a Tesla Ranger anthology that we put out, but we put a sign on our door, PG's idea, that was just like, if only Stan Lee were somewhere nearby, we could buy him a beer. He never took us up on it. We did get security called on us at a room party later that night where, in fairness, we were being really loud. But yeah, so that was just kind of an exciting adventure to share. I don't know that there was ever a conversation, so to speak, between PG and Stan Lee, but in some ways, I almost like our encounter better than if it was just some sort of generic, hey, I'm a big fan. He says, oh, good, thank you. And like that would have been fine, but I kind of like our story better.
Right. Yeah, that was. Yeah, I remember one time that year I came up to your room and played. I think you had brought your PS3 or PS4 with you.
Could be. I think we did that a couple of times.
Yeah. But so at this point, and draw a blank. Um, oh, is doing the daily YouTube podcasts, or I guess you could call it podcasts.
Yeah, it's a video.
Yeah. Is that is that harder or easier than when you used to do your daily?
Christiana's Shallow Thoughts was back
Yeah.
in that was like 2007, 2008, which seems incredible that it was. No, I think 2008 and 2009 is the year that I did that. To answer the question, the 5 more minutes is way easier than that because for
Well, you're not
5
that
more.
shallow for one thing.
Hmm?
I said you're not that shallow for one thing.
Well, for 5 more minutes, like I literally do no preparation at all. I'm getting up and I sit in front of the computer and then I just stream of consciousness talk about whatever I'm thinking of first thing in the morning and then I post it. And it takes probably a grand total of 15-20 minutes of my time at max. So super easy in that sense. Christiana's Shallow Thoughts, even though they weren't long, was still scripted and then recorded and then edited and then posted as a podcast, which was more work than just uploading a YouTube video. And so to answer the question, 5 more minutes is way easier. Shallow Thoughts was one of my original experiments of doing something every day. Excuse me. And it was a lot of fun. I really liked it. And I had a small but passionate following for that podcast. Because the numbers were, in terms of the absolute numbers, they were never big. But boy, the people who liked it really liked it. And I got a lot of pleasing feedback for that. But it was also what I recognized, and the reason that I kind of that I decided to bring it to a close back at that time was that as much fun as I was having with it, I wasn't doing anything else. And so I was kind of doing this slightly more ephemeral day-to-day thing, and it was taking the place of any bigger projects. And so that's why I kind of decided I wanted to focus more on the bigger stuff, which has not always been successful because sometimes without that routine, I just don't do anything at all. But see, the advantage of Phyllis by comparison is that even though I'm likewise not doing a lot of other projects at the same time that I'm writing that, once I have the story done, that's a bigger sort of chunk of stuff rather than any individual shallow thought. I'm going to have, it's at like 140,000 words where it is right now. And so, not quite done, but getting there. So that's a significant novel length that I'll then be able to actually do something larger with, right, as opposed to Shallow Thoughts, which was that was really all it was ever intended to be. I've thought occasionally of doing sort of just a podcast kind of collection of them, just to kind of bring them back into awareness, or doing one of those page a day calendar or bathroom book types of things with it. But that podcast was so much in the moment that a lot of those episodes probably wouldn't play today in the same way because I'm making meta jokes about stuff that had just happened, or I'm literally responding to voicemails or something like that. And so that stuff doesn't necessarily translate well to being revisited.
Right. And then of course, for a while you were also doing a kind of like who would win.
Yeah, Sci-Fi Smackdown.
Yeah. Someone else took it over, and then Are they still doing it, or?
No, basically what the problem there was is that the three of us, it was me and Tony Mast and Trampus Whiteman, we got a little ahead of ourselves. We were very ambitious, and then we came up with this podcast that required a significant amount of research and planning to try to have it, and we just couldn't make the scheduling work. Ultimately, we did a handful of episodes, but then just found ourselves increasingly more unable to actually just schedule and do an episode, and so it kind of pod faded as a result. But boy, it was fun while we were doing it. Yes, my podcasting career is littered with so many such exciting but ultimately not successful endeavors.
Yeah, I sometimes feel the same way. And it's easy to do if you're not a Scott Sigler who has years and years and years of pre-done stuff to.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, just because obviously there's a lot of factors at play there. One is that once you've gotten to the point where you feel like you're able to manage it, being able to work on it full time and really treat it like a career is going to make a big difference there in terms of the amount of time you have to spend creating content to put out there. But also, like, he works like crazy, and then he was successful enough that he's able to pay someone to also crack the whip on him a little bit if he's not getting enough done.
Right. So at this point, would you say that's like your goal with your writing, or is it more just a side job for you?
Well, honestly, I'm not sure. Like, in some ways, I feel like if that fell in my lap, I wouldn't push it away or anything. But I also don't hate my day job, and it's kind of I feel like in a lot of ways I am okay having it just be a hobby, which isn't to say I'm closed off to other options, but also I think some of those things, like being a full-time writer, is probably the sort of thing that doesn't just fall into your lap. You really have to be trying to push for that and have that be your goal and be always working towards it. And I'm not sure enough that that's what I want to do that, which is always going to mean that I don't have as much time and energy to focus on it as I would if it was all full time. But it also means that I don't have to give up some of the security and positive elements of having a more structured day job. Because one thing I know about myself is that I don't always respond well to a total lack of structure. And so if I were going to try to do writing or something full time like that, I would really need some way to keep it from just being laying around the house and not doing anything all day.
Okay. But then, of course, Luna would probably really like it.
Well, that's certainly true. What I just need is a way that people will pay me to play with Luna all day.
Well, if you had your if you had your webcam looking at you 24/7.
Yeah, well, she is pretty cute. Speaking of which, I'll just point my camera just down at my side here. Got a snoozing corgi right there.
Well, at least that's better than her. I didn't ask to be on video today, Mom.
Yeah. Well, it is a question. Like, she is a good example of so many things in life where you make choices, and there's always going to be positives and negatives associated with any choice. Like, so for example, I love Luna. She's a great companion. She's a source of much comfort and love for me. But there are also times where I feel like, wouldn't it be nice, like, coworkers, hey, we're all going to the movies after work. And I'm like, oh, well, I can't because Luna's at home. I have to make sure she gets fed. I have to make sure she gets taken out. And there's responsibilities associated with these things, right? And so it's the same for any of this stuff is that anything that you choose to spend time on is time that you're not spending on something else. And we always have to make these choices, right? And so
Right.
in a lot of ways, even though there's a lot that seems appealing about the idea of being a full-time writer, there's the other side of that coin, right? Right now I have a job where I get benefits and there's structure, and it's probably more money than I would make if I was writing full time, unless you become a bestseller, but you can't bank on that. So we're always all making choices about a phrase that's just kind of been running through my head recently, and I still don't know where it came from, is just there are many paths through the forest. Just the idea that there's lots of different ways to do stuff, and you just kind of you pick one, and you can't get too hung up on, well, what if you picked the other thing, because the other thing would have really been just different, not necessarily a better or worse, because there's always going to be ups and downs to anything.
Yeah, I've sometimes thought it would be interesting if you could occasionally just check in with alternate versions of you where you make different decisions and say, so how's X going with you?
I actually did I did the reading for an escape pod story earlier this year, I think, maybe at the end of last year, called Send in the Ninjas. But that's exactly what it was about, was the idea that, in some ways, you have access, like on the internet, to all these alternate versions of yourself that you can just do polls of hey, a whole bunch of us in our versions of ourselves all went out to dinner at this particular restaurant. So what did everybody get, and was it good? And so, because I'm going to go to this restaurant now and I haven't been there before, so what should I have? So try to find the versions of myself who have been there before, and what did they get, and was it good? And it's kind of neat.
Yeah, I was thinking though, what could be a possibly interesting story like that is if you find the one version of you that had what you as a child you had thought would have been your perfect life.
Mm-hmm.
And you find out enough about that version of you so that all you'd have to do is make that version of you disappear, and you just step right in.
Yeah,
the question would be, would you?
Well, there's also just the idea that if it wasn't really you that had made the decisions that led to that point, would you really be in a position where you could fully appreciate that? Or would you be constantly just feeling like somehow you didn't earn that version of your life or whatever? I don't know. It's all very complicated and psychological at that point. But one of the best shows on Netflix, in my opinion, is BoJack Horseman, which in some ways is just kind of a silly cartoon with a lot of Hollywood satire. But it also tells a surprisingly dramatic story about people with, insecurities and depression and that sort of thing, that it mixes in with all of the Hollywood and animal jokes. But just the idea that if you build too much of your sense of happiness on the idea of achieving specific accomplishments, you'll often find that that's just kind of a treadmill, is that no matter how far you get in that pursuit, you're always still just going to be looking ahead to what's the next thing, and you don't actually ever appreciate it in the moment.
Right. Yeah, I think Mr. Destiny was kind of a film based on the same idea.
Yeah. It's been a while since I thought of that one, but that was James Belushi, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, where had he hit the baseball, his life took one trip, and if he didn't hit the baseball, it took another trip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he decided he liked the not hitting the baseball life.
Well, it's interesting because that's certainly something that I think comes up a lot in variety of fictional settings. Yeah, but again, it's that same element that I was talking about before, is that if you get too caught up on like, well, what if I had made some other decision? Like it's human to wonder, but I think it's also ultimately not healthy to dwell on it. Like the classic poem that comes up in this sort of question is the whole Robert Frost Two Roads in the Snowy Wood, and the end of that poem is, of course, I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And that's the part that people tend to quote as an argument for why you should choose the road less traveled by. But if you read the whole poem, that's actually not what the poem is saying. It's not about one being better than the other. The whole point is that you can't take both. And so you have to pick one. And it's natural then to wonder what the other one would have been. But you can never really know. And so when we get to that line of like, and that has made all the difference, the specific context of that in the poem is that he is saying, I really don't know what the other road would have been like, but it's natural for me to try to defend which one I picked. And so, so I'll say, oh, I took the road less traveled by, and that made all the difference, as though somehow I'm morally superior for having chosen the better one. And that's why I'm smart and I did the right thing, when the whole point is that really, before you chose, there was no way to know. And now, even after you choose, there's no way to know what the other one would have been better or not. And so you can kind of tell yourself that you chose the better one, but you'll never know really.
Right. Yeah, I remember in one of the guy who invented Star Trek,
Gene Roddenberry?
one of his other series, I think it was Andromeda.
Mm-hmm.
He had a character which basically lived in like multiple. She could like send multiple versions of herself out along different lines, and then she could find which one was the best and decide to live in that one. I thought sometimes that would be a cool power to have.
Yeah. It's a little bit like Garnet's future vision in Steven Universe, which is another one of my favorite cartoons, which is hers is just, it's kind of all about being able to, because it's not future vision in the literal sense of seeing exactly what will definitely happen. It's more a matter of being able to like do like mathematical predictions of saying, okay, well, if I go left, then I have an 85% chance of success in this one particular thing. If I go right, then I only have a 15% chance likelihood of success, but this other good thing will also happen as a result. But it's all kind of projections and
right,
trying to choose the best path based on that, but still being surprised sometimes.
Okay. So, for people who don't know where they can find you, where are you on the web?
All of my stuff goes up at ChristianaEllis.com. I am at Christiana Ellis on Twitter. So that's kind of where I try to put all my stuff. That's where my 5 More Minutes YouTube videos go up there and on YouTube. My podcasts post there, talking about Survivor when it's in season, the occasional episodes of Watching 100 Movies that I do with Mike, and then, of course, the daily posts of Phyllis Esposito, Interdimensional Private Eye, go there as well.
Okay. So, are you ever going to get back to, hey, let's watch a movie?
Yes, and in fact, we did one recently that unfortunately the audio turned out pretty poor on, so I didn't ever actually post it. But so that was kind of we were trying to get back into doing that more often, and then our first attempt back didn't work out very well.
Yeah, I have found since Microsoft took Skype over, it's not as steady as it used to be.
Mm. Yeah, I always had used a piece of software called Pamela to record the calls from Skype, and it wasn't working the last time I tried it. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, Microsoft has been updating it a lot. They've even updated the Linux version, which is something that hadn't happened in years.
Well, like that's what always often happens with these sorts of things is some new program comes along, and the idea is that it will, it's this great thing that everybody loves because it's super easy to use and convenient and free. But it becomes really successful on those bases, but nobody knows how to make money with it. And so then, of course, when someone tries to come in and make the changes that will allow them to profit from it, that's when people don't like it anymore.
Right. Okay, well, it has definitely been nice to chat with you.
Likewise.
Unfortunately, the Facebook gods have not deemed us with any extra questions.
Oh, well.
Just checking one more time, but no. I don't see any. Of course, as soon as we stop, that's when all the questions are going to come in.
Yeah, that can happen.
Okay, well, I will, hopefully everyone will start checking out your YouTube video. That way we can get you into the triple digits of viewers.
You know what? It's if more people want to watch it, then that's great. But it's also at least 5 more minutes. I really almost do it more for me than anybody else.
All right. Well, it's definitely been fun chatting with you again, and looking forward to seeing what's next from you in your fiction and otherwise.
Great. I'll try to actually have stuff come out.